I would respectfully submit that of greater importance is how are we going to adapt our student experience academically to give all of the students, regardless of their majors and academic areas of interest, the skills they need with artificial intelligence to get really good paying jobs and to do their positions better when they graduate.
Welcome to Small College America, a podcast dedicated to exploring the role and value of small colleges in the higher education landscape. I'm Kent Barnes, and I'm joined by my co-host, Dean Hoke.
Thank you very much. Today we have an old friend from many days ago, but Irv is in a very interesting area. I'm going to get into it in a moment, but I want to bring out, we have traditionally spoken to presidents and provosts and other senior officers. I believe this may be the first time we have interviewed someone from the technology side of the business. So I think this is an important show to be doing today. With that in mind, joining us today is Irv Bruckstein, a transformational technology executive with more than 3 decades of experience across higher education, enterprise IT, and cybersecurity. He most recently served as CIO at Washington College, where he built IT operations following a ransomware incident, which we will talk about later, modernized infrastructure, and led major initiatives in cybersecurity, digital transformation, and online learning. Irv has just become the incoming CEO of a group called CyberAI Group, where he focused on advancing AI-driven cybersecurity solutions and helping organizations strengthen resilience in an evolving threat landscape. Known for building high-performance teams and aligning technology with strategic outcomes, he brings a very pragmatic, results-oriented approach to leadership. Irv holds a BS in computer science and mathematics and an MS in cybersecurity from Hofstra University School of Engineering. Irv, welcome to Small College America. Thank you for coming on today.
Thank you for the kind introduction, Dean. I appreciate the invitation to join the podcast today.
Thank you.
Well, we're really excited to have you, and I'm going to kick things off with a question that will give our listeners some insight into your background. Irv, your career includes working with some of the largest institutions in the country, Columbia University, NYU, where you helped build an entire campus from the ground up in Abu Dhabi. So not NYU in New York, but in Abu Dhabi. But at some point in your career, you made kind of a deliberate shift towards smaller colleges. And since our audience is focused a lot on small colleges, would love to know what drew you in that direction and what surprised you about small colleges having worked for some of the largest places in the country.
Sure. The appeal to me of a smaller organization is that a head of IT, a chief information officer, can have a far more dramatic impact on the strategic direction and also the student experience. In larger institutions, there are administrative layers. Typically, you have CIOs of each school, then you have CIO councils, and things tend to get singularly focused on IT and those silos, whereas in the smaller institutions, you could have more of a business person's mindset and be far more impactful. Now, in terms of what surprised me the most, perhaps I was naive in making the switch and always feeling that smaller institutions could make decisions more quickly and give them a tactical advantage over larger higher education institutions. But to my surprise, all of the shared governance frameworks and committees and layers of bureaucracy in the decision making exist pretty much the same in small institutions as the large ones. That still leaves some opportunity for making transformational change more so, but that was a big surprise that there was not much different in the governance structures.
That glacial pace that is so common in higher ed really is common, regardless of larger or smaller institution.
Except when an institution faces an existential threat like a global pandemic. Then somehow, large or small, they marshal the ability to make quick decisions. So it is interesting to note that.
I want to ask you a quick follow-up, Irv, because I really appreciate the fact that you emphasized on a smaller college campus, you can really think a lot about the student, and it's not just about IT and infrastructure. What did you find in your experience that as a small college CIO, you were able to do that a university, a larger organization CIO just simply can't?
Sure, I'll give a few examples. One of the first large projects that I implemented was a student success and retention CRM. Now, that didn't go exactly as planned, but the concept was that because the scope of the environment was more manageable, my lens is to look at every time a student touches an institution as a priceless nugget of data that if we could capture that and then apply various algorithms to it, we could actually use that to enhance student success and retention and early alert. And although the project didn't exactly play out the way I had hoped, it was transformational in opening everyone in the institution's eyes to those possibilities. And to think about having a baseline standard, there's always a nexus between academic freedoms and the faculty and an institution saying, hey, would you mind if we all took attendance? Would you mind if we all had these same fundamental elements in every course shell so we could get standardized data? Because while you can make data-driven decisions to support success and retention, you can do that a whole lot better if you have certain common data elements across your operating model. So that was an interesting opportunity. I will say also, I was able to navigate the landscape to do the first ever pilot of online learning at Washington College. Now, that was a big deal. Washington College is the oldest institution of higher education in America, founded by George Washington after the Revolutionary War. And, their business model has been pretty standard for 240 plus years. So the ability to actually pitch an idea to experiment with a pilot for online learning and actually to lead that, I don't know that any CIO in a large institution would ever have that opportunity to do so.
Excellent examples. Thank you. Dean, I'll turn it to you.
Very good. Well, let's keep talking a little bit about Washington College in particular. I believe you arrived in, was it around January 2024, and you had a pretty serious situation that had occurred just before you went in. You had been still dealing with the fallout of a very serious ransomware attack that occurred, I guess, about a year earlier. And you were brought in essentially to rebuild the whole situation, try to rebuild that whole data system. Can you walk us through what that was about and how you attacked this very serious problem?
Sure. Well, let's start at the beginning.
Okay.
So after I was offered the position and accepted the position of Chief Information Officer, there was, I guess, a couple of interesting questions that I had that didn't come out during the recruiting process. So I pride myself on building high-performing teams because it's the team that delivers the results, not any one particular person. So my first day as CIO, I made a visit over to the President's Chief of Staff, and I asked for a copy of the organizational chart for the IT department. And I was quite surprised when I was told that everything in IT had been outsourced. And at that moment, standing there, I was the only staff member in the IT department.
No kidding.
And Washington College is in a very rural, historic town. I describe it to people as like living in a Norman Rockwell painting. So, if you had to recruit cybersecurity experts from the greater Chestertown, Maryland area, you would be hard pressed to build an IT team with all the skills that you needed. So one of the first things I did was decide how I was going to build out the IT team. And I have, as you can imagine, a very extensive professional network. And I decided I was going to have positions that were either all remote or hybrid or extreme hybrid and build a blended team. So the first step was building this team together of top tier professionals. So even though when I was done, our numerical headcount was modest, about 14 full-time employees, plus our still extended vendor partners, because some of the outsourcing were long-term commitments that couldn't be undone. Once we had that team in place, although we were a modest in headcount, our depth of knowledge and expertise was extensive. The team at Washington College IT, and this is still true today, could go head to head with any institution, regardless of sophistication or depth on the bench. And I think that was really important. Now, in terms of what about the cybersecurity situation, like every institution, when you have a cybersecurity incident, you rely on your cybersecurity insurance policy, which usually includes various support mechanisms to get legal counsel, and you build a team together to work on a playbook. And that had played out before I arrived. But I was not content after I did my assessment of where things stood. I mean, things were stabilized and all the right things were done and said, as you would expect. But I wanted to understand what the root cause of that cybersecurity breach was. How did the criminals get in and what data did they use? And one of the things I did was I did a search on the dark web and the deep web to find out what data on Washington College was out there. And to my surprise, we had about 6 times the amount of data out there for cyber criminals to make use of. And it's not because there was necessarily a breach, but the cyber criminals are very sophisticated. They have very large organizations, and they take little bits of data here and there and they compile it. And what I found was a lot of the data that was out there was gleaned off of our public website. And the reason for that was the college did not have a secure private intranet portal. So by default, if people wanted to communicate, they would put stuff up on the public website. And it might seem innocuous, executive phone numbers and email addresses and photos, all things that cyber criminals could use as part of a broader attack base. So one of the first things I did was to implement a private secure intranet portal, and we launched that. It was called MyWashCall, and it's still operating today. And that was really transformative for the institution because now we could scrub data that was sensitive and intended only for the Washington College community and take that out of the purview of the public internet. That was huge. The other thing that I noticed, and this is true of many higher education institutions, there's something called the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, which was put in place by the legislators in 1999, 2000. And initially there was confusion. It was called the Financial Controls Act, and it wasn't clear that applied to institutions of higher education. A few years later, early 2000s, the Department of Education had clarified that, yes, this applies to all institutions of higher education. And many organizations, especially the small to mid-sized institutions, don't have the level of expertise necessary to fully be in compliance with the GLBA, or the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act. So I formed a team across the entire college with all business areas represented, because it's not just digital data, it's all data that is subject to the GLBA. And we put a multi-month program together to be fully compliant with GLBA. Now, that had a myriad of other benefits because it's not necessarily just the GLBA itself, but one of the elements of being in compliance with GLBA means that you have fully implemented the NIST 800 framework. And NIST, for those who aren't aware, is a government organization called the National Institute of Standards. It used to be called the Federal Bureau of Standards. It's paid for by all of our tax dollars, and it provides a very robust framework for cybersecurity incident response, data classification and protection. And one of my proudest achievements for Washington College, again, which is modest in size, is to have us be fully compliant with GLBA. And I had everyone on the team. We compiled a report attesting to everything that was done, all the supporting documentation and efforts as to why we were in compliance with GLBA. And I had every member of the team sign it. And we filed that away for safekeeping to codify it. A part of it also involved implementing state-of-the-art cybersecurity tools and methods, building out a cybersecurity incident response team. You can't fly a plane without a dashboard with good gauges. So you have to have tools that can measure and monitor all of the data that's important for cybersecurity. And no human could possibly process all that data and make meaningful decisions separating what's important from the noise. So some of the tools that I implemented employ machine learning and artificial intelligence to ingest all that data and to help us 24 by 365, not just alert on it, but actually take actions to prevent a cyber security attack like that ransomware attack from ever happening again. And I'd be happy to elaborate on the nuance of how to do that in higher education. It's very important that, we're not like a bank or a military installation where I could say you can only log on to these websites or you can only load these two screens on your computer. You have to do what's called analyzing patterns of life of everybody's behaviors and develop a baseline of what is normal behavior. And then it's the deviations from those normal behaviors which give you the triggers for cybersecurity incidents. So, for example, if I show up at work at 8 a.m. every day and I leave at 5 p.m., I rarely work on Saturdays. And all of a sudden on Saturday, my computer wakes up, starts downloading large amounts of data from unusual sources. That would be a trigger for the intrusion detection and prevention system to say, hey, what's going on here? And take action.
Very good. Ken?
So, Irv, small colleges are often described, and you've kind of referenced this in your experience at Washington College, as target-rich, resource-poor when it comes to cybersecurity. I mean, we have enormous amounts of sensitive student data, but as you found probably when you walked into Washington, very seldom the staffing or the budget that a large research university might have. Do you have a sense that most college presidents truly understand the cyber risk that their institutions face? And should the CEIO, given the risks, have a seat at the leadership table?
Sure, those are excellent questions. So I think most all presidents of any size higher education institution is aware of the risk because of the notoriety of those breaches that have been well publicized. I will say very few people in the leadership team outside of IT really understand the enormity of the task to be cyber safe and what that entails. And there are always two ways to sell something. One is on the merits of the need, and the other is on fear. And sometimes when you've experienced a cybersecurity incident, that lays the groundwork for getting additional funding that is necessary to implement the tools and methods that one requires to really be cyber safe. So that, I would say in answer to your question, one of my challenges was how do I staff up and how do I get the funding to do what's necessary? And that was a combination of the aftermath of the cyber attack at Washington College and also the ability to leverage advanced tools using AI, which is a force multiplier. You can accomplish quite a bit at a much lower cost.
Very good. Let's move into a little bit of a different subject. And that's particularly about the wonderful world of AI, which to most of us is very new. But that doesn't seem to be the case for you. I mean, you've been thinking about AI since, well, at least 2019, and I suspect even before then. And I know you also co-hosted a symposium. Is that at Salve Regina in Rhode Island, right? And
Yes, that's correct.
right. And it was about adaptive learning and AI-driven student outcomes. AI now is everywhere. It's prevalent. I mean, it's totally immersed in the systems. What should a small college realistically be doing with AI today? And where do you see the institutions going forward with this and possibly getting in trouble?
Sure. My answer to that is multifaceted. So my foray into AI was out of necessity to properly defend from a cybersecurity perspective. But in terms of pedagogy and education, I think in my experience, many institutions, the initial reaction to AI was, oh my God, our students are going to use AI to cheat. And how can we actually detect this and prevent this from happening? While I don't dismiss that that's an important topic, I would respectfully submit that of greater importance is how are we going to adapt our student experience academically to give all of the students, regardless of their majors and academic areas of interest, the skills they need with artificial intelligence to get really good paying jobs and to do their positions better when they graduate. And I think some institutions have done much better than others, particularly the larger institutions that are well funded in adapting. And it goes back to my earlier comments about governance. AI is moving very quickly. And there's also a cybersecurity element to this as well. When you make use of AI, most folks take the low cost of entry and they're using things like OpenAI and Google Gemini and all the open source things.
Yeah.
And that's fine for initial education purposes. But what happens when you get out in the real world? And how is that data secured if you're using AI and giving it access to sensitive corporate or organizational data? How do you secure that? And at the top of that means building your own private large learning model engines that you secure on premises or in your own facilities, whether it's a virtual facility or on-prem. But how do you secure that information and make use of it? So I think that there's opportunity in that regard in terms of academic programming for the student's benefit. The other really important use of AI in pedagogy, which can only be realized by institutions that adopt a portion of their pedagogy being online, is what I call adaptive learning. So when you have a physical classroom environment, every student is exposed to pretty much the same lectures, the same course experience. When you take that information online, and if you build your core shells correctly, perhaps employing things like a flipped classroom approach where the learning occurs online and the in-person time is used for experiential learning and application of that information, every student in the class could be monitored their path through that academic material with an AI engine in the background. And once a student masters a certain concept, they could move on. The AI engine could see what students are mastering on an individualized basis and what topics within the course the students are struggling with. And every student could get a tailored path through that academic material to maximize student success and learning outcomes. And I think that this is just the tip of the spear in this area, but I truly believe that is the future of AI and education that offers tremendous promise in how we educate our students for all academic disciplines.
I'd like to do a kind of a quick follow-up to this because this all sounds great. It also sounds in many ways a bit frightening if I were a college administrator. And what I mean by that is that we're going into a whole new world. It sounds very expensive. It sounds like new personnel, new systems need to be in place. And also, quite frankly, going into this, do I really have the talent to make these kind of things happen? I'd be curious from your perspective about that whole situation.
Sure. Well, smaller institutions could outsource some of these. There are many firms, I won't name any in particular, that do online core shell development and things of that nature and have more advanced technology. But I would submit, if you look at the demographics and the declining student population that all institutions are facing right now, just because of the population curve and where things are, you have the same number of seats in classrooms across higher ed, but you have fewer students to fill those seats. So you have to say to yourself, what is going to distinguish your institution to draw students to want to come? And if you can offer, for example, just classes or even minors in topics that are of interest, like artificial intelligence, like cybersecurity, um, things like doing 5-year MBA to retain your business students. All of these things, it's not just a matter of recruiting, it's but how do you recruit and retain the students? I think higher education institutions that adapt and embrace AI and adapt their curriculum quickly, not take 4 years to reimagine their curriculum while other institutions are pacing them. Those institutions that adapt and embrace AI and change faster will have a strategic advantage over those that don't.
Okay.
Right. Irv, you recently made a significant shift from being a buyer and consumer and implementer of technology inside of higher education to now building cybersecurity products at CyberAI Group. What does the view look like from that side? And what do you wish technology vendors understood better about what small colleges actually need? You've got this really interesting perspective on both sides of this.
Sure. Well, I would say from the other side, it really is a matter of leveraging and longstanding relationships and also establishing new relationships, right? Higher education institutions have a very long sales cycle. So if you're a vendor on the outside, it's a bit of a dance, right? How do you get their interest? How do you present something that's of value to them? And that varies from large institution to small institution, because I think every institution has similar needs, but smaller institutions don't necessarily have the resources to deliver on that internally themselves. So I think those are some of the nuances to deal with the Cyber AI group. I have an interesting lens because I've been an early adopter of advanced cybersecurity technology, and I understand where the market has gaps that need to be filled. So one of the first things we're striving to fill is with a product called Sentinel, and that's going to do something called continuous attack surface penetration testing, both externally outside the firewall and internally on campus, and provide, it's going to be backed up by security operations centers in the United States and also one in the Middle East for a follow the sun SOC as a service strategy. This will give small colleges to mid-sized colleges state-of-the-art expertise that they couldn't afford to do themselves internally. So I think that is an interesting opportunity. A lot of folks do these ethical hacking, penetration tests, and evaluations at specific points in time. I actually coined the term the AI CISO, so that an executive or a cybersecurity expert on an app on their phone, this is part of the Sentinel product line, will be able to get real-time information. The minute their environment changes, they don't have to wait for that once a quarter or once a year pen test to see those results. So the other thing is you always have to wrap around necessary services, things like GLBA compliance, business continuity and disaster recovery. How do you survive these attacks, which are prolific in higher ed and many other industries? So we're building out a whole professional services portfolio, and I look forward to providing assistance to higher education and broader industries through product development and services in this ever-changing space.
Yeah, it's sad that those needs are so relevant and important today, but I'm certainly glad for my institution and other institutions that are people like you who are thinking long-term and creatively about how to address these things. So thanks, sir, for that question. Dean, I'll turn it to you for the last question of our time together.
Well, and indeed, this is, I'm afraid, our last question, even though I think right now we could easily go about an hour and a half into some of the earlier discussions that you had. But let's talk a little bit about the future. A traditional last question we ask everybody is, pull out the magic ball or behind you, possibly the big computer, and tell me what you're seeing in the next 5 to 10 years, and particularly from a technology, cybersecurity point of view. I mean, how do you see this all coming together, particularly in the world of colleges and universities? Be my futurist for me.
Sure. I see the tools getting more and more powerful and sophisticated, and I see that in parallel that the cyber criminals are also going to be using more advanced and sophisticated tools as well. I think cybersecurity is probably the best industry on the planet in terms of if you're a student trying to figure out what you want to major in. You're never, ever really going to be done. But I think that artificial intelligence, advanced tools, and automation are going to be key for higher education institutions to be properly positioned to keep themselves safe and that treasure trove of data that they're entrusted with safe, as well as regulatory compliant. In terms of the future of education with artificial intelligence and advanced technologies, I think schools that embrace that and deliver that well will have a better and easier time of recruiting and retaining students than those that don't. To me, it's a very simple thing. Go out to your favorite job board, look at the top jobs that have more jobs posted than you have applicants available. And if I were in charge of curriculum at a higher education institution, I would say to myself, what courses and degrees and certifications do I need to offer to be able to produce students that can fill all those jobs where there's a shortage of skilled experts? So I see that as the future, and institutions that recognize that and take advantage of it will be very well positioned, and those that don't will be left behind.
Well, that's some great advice for our listeners and for higher ed in general. Irv, thank you very much for this conversation. I think that your experience and your expertise will stick with our listeners for quite some time. Go to our work of protecting a campus, its people, its data, its future, where you can find so details often happens invisibly, and you've helped make it more visible today than when we'd like us to cover. So we're grateful for your time and your candor, and most importantly, on your favorite experience you have. For those of you who are listening
Small
or
College
viewing,
America is
if you'd
made
like to
possible
learn
with
more about
underwriting
support from Edu Alliance Group, a higher education consulting firm that champions small colleges and the communities they serve. On behalf of our guest, Irv Bruckstein, and my co-host Dean Hoke, and myself, thank you for joining us.